Hi everybody, in my blog text and in my thesis I'm touching a subject of improvisation from the viewpoint of bass players, beginning bass players, in the context of how improvisation is being taught in the schools and in the academia. This thesis is called A New and Improved Study Book for the Improvising Bass Player. As everybody knows, during the classical and Baroque periods of music, improvisation used to be an integral part of music. As though something happened that led to a division between musicians who improvise and I guess write music, and between the people who just perform it and play it. So, of course, teaching improvisation for young students is really important. I think it's a key subject in anybody's musical studies. So, what do I mean by improvisation? It's kind of the stuff that I've been doing my whole life. So from the aesthetics of popular and jazz music, the history and the tradition. So everybody should be able to, at least from the viewpoint of bass player, be able to accompany other musicians, other players. Of course, play a small fill, improvised fill in, for example, when chorus is ending and the verse is coming back, or we're going into a bridge or something different. Something like that in the form happens. So those are good places for filling. And of course, playing their own solo using, for example, one scale. Usually we start by using the pentatonic scales. So the whole study book is based on displaying chordal harmonies with fitting scales on predetermined form of music and predetermined harmony, so chords. One reason for why I'm doing it is the latest renewed national curriculum for basic education. So there is kind of an urgency with the studies when somebody starts as a bass player studying it in the school. I should be, as a teacher, should be able to really quickly get the student through with the basic stuff, so that he or she can feel like they can already play something and kind of like get the feeling that I'm learning and this is fun. And of course, learning theory is not fun for really young students. The youngest one that I've had is 7 years old, but he's still playing. He's 12 now, so I think I did a good job as a teacher with that particular student. So the student's wishes is a big part of this study book. So being able to teach the theory needed for any kind of song from the style of pop or jazz, so that they can play their own bass line, create their own bass line, or the feeling, like I said before, or even maybe at the end of the studies do a little solo. And because of the curriculum is kind of like based for the wishes of the student, so that they can study something else too. So it's not that they are required to do the theory and the improvisation stuff. They can do something else too. So I guess in this study book I'm trying to sell the idea of doing the whole thing that we used to do instead of choosing something else. So that's one of the biggest reasons. So the book will be naturally advancing with theoretical topics and assignment in hand-to-hand with fitting styles of music. So I will be going through the various kind of styles and how the book progresses in its theoretical studies. Also, in the book I'm digging into the subject of how I teach, and already, even if the book isn't ready at this point, I'm learning that maybe just giving a piece of paper with all the theory on it and kind of like hoping that the student checks it out for the next week isn't the best way of progressing on or teaching. So one big thing that I have noticed is that it's better to go through the theory on the class, in the classroom, maybe even kind of like draw the things that we're doing on the neck, the patterns or scales with the students. So already he or she has a kind of like better picture of what they're supposed to do, how to apply the scale or chord notes. And of course the fact that what is the most important, what is the core of improvisation, the basic root and playing the fifth, like the bass players, the two most important notes, and how would you build the bigger harmonies above on that basic way of accompanying somebody else. And of course the order in which I do it is kind of like trying to go from easier things to gradually getting harder and harder. At the end, kind of like being able to play the whole scale on using the whole neck. That's kind of far reach at the level where my students are, but of course if I can give them the knowledge, then maybe later in their musical careers they can check how you could do the whole neck. But at this point it's using a little small pattern on the neck and how to use that. And of course there's some things that need to be more emphasized than others. So really trying to dig in what's important and what's not. And of course the last thing is to kind of like create a more permanent existence for the way I teach music or playing the bass. So the documentation is going to last forever, even if I'm not here anymore. So the next thing is I'm going to show you a quick preview in how the study book advances and what kind of theoretical topics are in it at the moment. So the first thing that I decided to do is go through the first position of the neck, so that the students get kind of like the first impression and first idea of where the notes are. And even if they can't find them on the note lines at that point, it doesn't really matter. They can just, the point is just to be able to name a note and kind of find the place where it is. So even at that point we can already play a lot of kind of like all classic rock songs, which is all 8-note basic things. Well, after that, when the first notes are kind of like in the below the fingers, and the students can find them, of course the first thing after the root note is the fifth. So the bass players finding like this note here is C, and the G, the fifth of the C note. You can already play like million country songs and even like Latin. Just being a little bit early with the second note. The student has to choose whether or not he or she is playing up the fifth, above the root, or below. So I guess that's the first thing. You have more choices than you have time to perform or do or choose. Okay. After the fifth, of course, the triads. And usually we kind of like major and minor triads. You can play basic kind of like 50s pop songs or something like happy sounding songs, or kind of like a blues, already 12-bar blues. After you have the triads, of course, going to 4-note chords. And usually we do kind of like a walking jazz standard, just playing out the 4-note chords. That's already really hard for most of the students, and I don't dare to make them play too many of those assignments. It's really good if they can manage at the beginning like 2 or 3 jazz standards. And of course, already at the point of 4-note chords, the kind of like the idea how I think about improvisation is present. So in a way, instead of playing just the notes out, the student should try to figure out a way of playing kind of like a box at the neck, where the notes are above and below the root note. So that's the easiest way of kind of like thinking a bass groove. So in the study book I used an example of the Dorian scale, minor 7th chord, and how by not playing it just up from the root note, you can use it around the root note, below also. So I think that's the best scale to start with, because it kind of like creates the box looking pattern on the scale. So by starting out with creating kind of like an easy, simple funk bass line of their own, I think that's a really easy way of getting into the mindset of improvising. And of course, by doing the same thing to all the scales and all the 4-note chords, or even 5-note chords, by thinking around the root note, where the notes are near the root note, all the other notes are near the root note, you can kind of like already improvise your own bass line, or even a small solo, even if the chords are changing and you don't use just one scale throughout the solo. And of course, in the end, also you have to be able to execute on the neck using your hand, and so there's going to be a couple of just technical exercises, so for the right hand and for the left hand, which kind of like these are exercises that force the students to play with the right technique. They're impossible to play without doing it the proper right way. Learn the theory and learn to play it in real time. Yeah, well, that's it.